Hi guys, so last time we did 2 PM and today we are doing New East. Also, hope you enjoy my rainbow t-shirt, I haven't worn it yet. Let's go with the New East vocal ranking. Just doing this. But anyone else tried to do that, they ain't doing that. Pulling words apart, it's in the throat or it's an issue. It's just the way his kind of voice sounds, it's his tone, but it's powerful, it's connected, it's full. I've been waiting for a female singer in K-pop to have a sustained G5 belt and knows really how to place it so forward. This is unbelievable. This is... Okay, so obviously New East have been a group for quite a long time, so they've had a lot of time to practice their vocals, and all the way through, everybody pretty much is a good singer, and there's quite a lot of singing parts in the songs, bar one person who we'll get to, but all of them have a good voice, and there's a lot of great vocals that I managed to analyse. But yeah, the order is tricky, but I think I've got it down. Anyway, without further ado, let's have a look at the vocals of New East. Okay, so in last place kinda had to be JR. He's the only person that hasn't really sung a ton and showcased much in the way of singing. I had a couple of clips to look at, but not a great deal past that. So it's kind of last by default, but I'll try my best to break down what I did see.
할 말이 있어요 언제나 thank you
커피를 너무 많이 마셨나 봐
뜨면 찾아올까 바람 불면 떠날 사람인데 사랑했다면 우리가 사랑했다면 우리가 사랑이면 걷는 너의 하루 발맞춰 걸어나.
Okay, so as I say, JR didn't really sing a great deal. I only kind of saw him sing seriously a few times. What I mainly noticed from his voice that he wasn't super confident in singing. Obviously the other four guys sang all of the songs at all the times. So Jayhawk never really had much of a reason to kind of sing in a technically proficient or difficult way. So I'm assuming that kind of through his career he mainly focused on the rapping and the dancing and leading the group rather than doing kind of the hard vocal parts. The voice that he did kind of display on occasion was a little bit shaky and lacked a little bit of stability and lacked a little bit of tuning because he clearly didn't sound too comfortable kind of doing anything with his voice outside of the rapping spoken stuff or kind of around his spoken pitch. When he stayed low and full in his kind of more baritonal voice, he sounded pretty good, pretty comfortable. It didn't have a great deal of places to go, no not obvious placement issues, but when he kept it full but soft but lower, his voice was nice, it worked really well, it just didn't have anywhere to really go. As he brought it up, he tended to bring a little bit of air into the sound and then it kind of lacked stability straight away. As I say, unless you really know what you're doing with a kind of gentle, soft approach, the more air in the sound and lack of chord closure can make it a little bit harder to tune and it's a harder feeling to get used to. And what I noticed in kind of JR's singing compilations and stuff, that's mainly what he did. He tried to do that and his stability and tuning did fall off a little bit and then he had no real way of getting into a higher place. I did also notice when he did try and kind of go into a higher place, he didn't know what to do to really lighten his tone very well. So he kind of just brought up as much chest weight as he possibly could and started yelling essentially. So basically JR's voice had a couple of places it was comfortable. If he stayed lighter and gentle but connected, he sounded pretty good but very varied. I mean, he didn't have basically much variety in his sound. He was very kind of stuck where it worked in the lower end of his voice. And as he brought it up, it was either kind of a bit too airy, which lacked stability, or it brought up way too much weight to the point where he was just pulling from the throat and he had no real kind of flexibility in the higher or middle part of his voice. So basically JR's voice, he didn't really showcase it a great deal and there really wasn't a great deal to it other than kind of a little bit of a pulled sound or a little bit too much air occasionally. I'm sure he could well be good in his comfortable lows, but he didn't really need to sing much and he never really did. Okay, so to me, of all the guys that kind of sang a lot more, Aaron had the least places to go into and the least varied voice, but he still had a very good singing voice. Let's watch him sing.
No, it makes no sense, cause you walked out the door, but it's the only way I hear. And I'm so sick of love songs, so tired of tears, so done with wishing. 짙은 어둠이 돼, 넌 나의 darkest star. crazy and that I am blind, risking it all in a glance. I'm your love, I'm the one, need your love, oh yeah. 무같이 눈물만 흐르네. 있었고 누굴 만날까 일러줄 곳이 하나도 없다. 걷는 이곳에 차라리 날 가둬줘 데자부. 갈수록 너를 원해 baby. 네가 있어야 곳은 어디니. 위에 적은 가사에 시작은 너였으면.
Aaron's voice was really interesting when I was looking at it. On first listen, it sounded kind of more powerful and resonant than it actually was, and as I heard more, I heard a few technical limitations that kind of puts him down here. He has a really kind of light, bright voice. He's got quite a higher sitting voice, and it works really, really well in the middle of his range. He has a kind of thinner vocal tone that as he kind of brings up, it doesn't have like a huge amount of weight to it, but when he adds the connection and adds the weight, it sounds really comfortable in this kind of middle area, and while he does add a bit more connection as he goes up and get into some higher areas, he doesn't technically do things with his voice that proficiently, as he kind of let him explore higher registers or into a really balanced mixed place. So Aaron's voice had a quite noticeable thin sound, a little bit of tightness when he went up. He had quite a narrow, closed sound, I felt like, which obviously ideally you want a more open resonant sound to kind of achieve the most potential that your voice can possibly have. But Aaron, when he was kind of anywhere above his middle of his voice, he kind of started bringing up a little bit of throat configuration. It wasn't like super throaty or super pulled or anything, but it just limited where he could go. In the middle of his voice, it sounded really nice and really good, but noticeably a little bit narrow and a little bit tight and closed, which just means that his vowel shape was possibly a little bit wrong sometimes. Then occasionally, he did do a thing where he opened his mouth a little bit more and have more of an open sound and get into a few different higher areas. But generally, Aaron's voice worked really well in the middle. That's quite endemic of people with a kind of a lighter, brighter, naturally thinner tone who don't really know how to kind of lighten a more powerful chord closure sound to go up into a higher area that everyone else kind of does in this group, which is why I've put Aaron fourth. His voice is still lovely, very good, and achieves the middle of his voice very well due to having a naturally thinner coordination that he brings up. But as I say, because when he was in his lows, his chord closure was there, but it wasn't as stable as kind of the middle of his voice. That's where it really suited. The placement really worked there, but it was, as I say, noticeably a little bit thin and a little bit tight, which kind of stopped it being able to achieve higher areas particularly well. So when he went above this kind of chest dominant belt he kind of had, but a thinner sound, he didn't really have anywhere to kind of go into. He didn't thin out hugely well to get into a big mixed belt or anything. So Aaron's voice was good, it was very stable, he was very consistent, and he understood it incredibly well, and it worked in the middle super well. Just didn't really have much variety, and didn't really have anywhere else to go above it because of the technique that he implemented, but he's still a very good singer, I have no doubt of that. Okay, Ren's voice was awesome. He noticeably kind of improved a lot from the early days into the singer that he is now. He did a lot more with his voice technically that was a lot better. Also, he is kind of the bridge gap. He's impressive and has a lot of things he can do with his voice, but isn't quite as technically proficient in some of the areas as the next two guys coming up. Without further ado, let's watch him sing.
Trying to feel that boy, or do you need more? I'm off a deep end, watch as I dive in. I'll never meet the ground. 우리의 좋아. Try to make the world seem better. Show me 100 million reasons to walk away. But baby, 맘이 자꾸 기억이 뒤바뀐 뒤로 뜨거운 날이 날 보는 것 같아. 어떻게 불은 켜 사라져 무심한 시간에 당신은 꽉 잡은 손 놓지 마. 갈수록 너를 원해 baby. 네가 있어야 할 곳은 여기니.
Okay, the first thing that really stood out to me about Ren's voice was the variety and the versatility that it possessed. He had a naturally kind of thinner, brighter tenor tone again. In the bottom of his voice, he often sung with a very thin coordination. It was quite light, but it also had a little bit of chord closure and a little bit of weight to it, which is very good because it set him up to get into higher areas of his voice, the middle of his voice, and to achieve those parts of his voice really well and really efficiently. There are a few technical limitations at the higher end, but in the middle of his voice, because it was thinner and naturally brighter, just like Aaron's, he brought it up really well, and Ren had a noticeable nasality present in his tone, which sometimes can get you a little bit stuck, as it did to a point as he went up, but from the middle of his voice and lower end of his voice, it thinned everything out and made the whole thing quite seamless, quite blended, and just sounded a little bit more comfortable all the way through than Aaron's did for me. In the middle of his voice, him and Aaron did pretty much the same sort of thing, but Ren had obviously a little bit more of nasality, so he sounded like he was pulling a tiny little bit from the throat as he kind of went to the middle of his voice. But he still achieved a nice open kind of full sound, but there was a little bit of tightness as he went up, which is why I haven't put him second or first, because his versatility and his range would kind of be endemic of somebody that was first or second, because he used a lot of parts of his voice really efficiently and really well, just as I say, because of that little bit of nasality that gets him stuck a little bit tight in the throat sometimes as he kind of goes to the middle of his voice. I can't really place him any higher than this on like a technical level, but his voice had a lot of things that it could do. He also, when he was singing kind of Lady Gaga songs, I noticed had an ability to get past this middle part of his voice. It sounded a little bit less comfortable to a point, and then kind of open things up, move things slightly to the head and to the face, and kind of do a more open, resonant sort of belt sound. Ren had a really good upper extension. Occasionally, when he kind of pulled into it, there was a little bit of extra weight in the sound, which kind of give it this big, open, full sound, but also sound a little bit tight again. But he had this area really nicely and really well. And then when he kind of let go a little bit of that weight and lightened and gone into a higher area, the mix was pretty balanced and pretty nice. As I say, it wasn't the most consistent thing I've ever heard in my life, and the placement wasn't perfect, but Ren had this upper extension that only the two guys coming up kind of have access to. And his voice over the years didn't used to have that, and now it does. So he's clearly practiced that area of his voice really well. And when he gets past the kind of the middle, it's a little bit tight sometimes, and opens it up and does a more resonant kind of forward sound and places more in the head while bringing up a good amount of chord closure from the lower end of his voice. He has a really lovely upper extension. Just to me, the technical limitations in the middle with the nasality and sounding a little bit stuck do limit him to third place, but Ren's voice was really good and improved a hell of a lot over the years. Okay, can I just say it's no surprise that Minhyun was chosen for 101. The guy's got an absolute dream voice. Technically isn't quite as maybe as profound in the middle of his voice as the next guy coming up, but his voice is gorgeous. Let's watch him sing.
숨을 더 뱉어봐요. 당신의 안에 남은 게 없다고. 눈을 감아봐요. 바람에 흩날려 온 그대의 사랑. 한편 언젠가는 떠나갈걸 이젠 슬쩍 봐도 알아 노래 제목을 나 대신 채워줘.
Okay, so Minhyun has the voice I would describe as absolute honey, absolute dream tone, and is kind of the definition of a gorgeous vocal. And technically it's pretty solid all the way through, just kind of to me lacks the kind of sustainable mixed voice that number one kind of has for me. Okay, so all the way through Minhyun's voice, it's very gentle, very calm, but doesn't lack dynamics and has a lot of different things that it can do. He's got a noticeably higher, more gentle, lighter voice, and when he's singing kind of upper keys, he's by far the most comfortable, and when New East are doing their kind of ballad songs, he is noticeably the most comfortable in this particular style, because the gentle way that he sings really showcases emotion very well, and really gets him into higher areas very well that ballads often do require. So, Minhyun's voice down the lower end of it, he does have a little bit of chord closure here and there, but more often than not he favours a kind of more gentle, airy kind of sound, which just allows for the voice to sound so beautiful and gentle, a little bit high, a little bit thinned out all the time. As I always say, if somebody relies on breath only and has no feeling of chord closure, as they go up that starts to limit things quite heavily. Minhyun kind of does this a little bit but also doesn't. As he approaches the middle of his voice and the high end of his voice, he sometimes sticks with the airy delivery, which only allows him to kind of get so high, and when he does kind of add a little bit more connection, he can only do it for so long. I feel like he has a decent mixed voice because he does have a certain feeling of chord closure, and when he goes into it, he has a nice upper extension, stays more connected, and these high kind of mixed belts, they're pretty good, but they don't get sustained hugely often, which suggests to me he doesn't have a huge feeling of chord closure a lot of the time, and isn't super comfortable when he's adding a bit more weight. While it sounds beautiful and sounds gorgeous, it's only slight notes and like an extension note rather than kind of doing sustained belts, which is purely because he's much more used to having a more gentle, kind of breathier sound all the way through. But because there is a feeling of chord closure there, occasionally his voice does still work in this way pretty well. Just because it's not as sustainable as number one for me, I don't put his kind of mix technically as impressive, and he doesn't have as many kind of varieties with his voice as number one does. Because he's so gentle and so soft and has a little bit more breath, he is probably the best at falsetto in the group. When he gets into the kind of his head voice, it sounds the most seamless, sounds the most beautiful. His passage navigation is exceptional, and because he sounds so good with the breathier coordination, he sounds really good when it's lighter and airier up in the top of his voice as well. So yeah, basically it's gentle, it's gorgeous, it's beautiful, it's pretty varied, just doesn't have the kind of sustainability in the mixed voice, purely because he's not as used to the chords together, and he's much more kind of commonly using more breath in the sound and more of an emotional ballad style delivery. But his voice still works with high tempo things. He does also beef up his sound a little bit, but it just doesn't sound quite as comfortable, which makes him a little bit dynamically not as varied as number one is for me personally. But his voice is bloody gorgeous. God, Baeko's voice is a little bit fun, isn't it? Technically, is it the best I've ever heard? Probably not quite, but it's so powerful, so fun, so interesting, and so unique and so captivating. Let's watch him sing and I'll break it down. Okay, so things that really stand out straight away to Baeko's voice is it's powerful, it's varied, it's dynamic, and it's so unique. No one sings like this in K-pop. Technically, there are a few things kind of in the upper end of his voice that aren't super ideal, but I'll get into that. The things that he does really well, all the way through kind of the lower end of his voice and the middle of his voice, he sounds very comfortable. There's a noticeable occasional bit of a throaty configuration. It sounds like things get a little bit stuck to a point, but all the way through this part of his voice, he can stay a little bit more breathy and sing ballad-leaning stuff and sound comfortable and really solid. He can open up a little bit more, add more chord closure and weight, and have a more big full sound all the way through that Minhyun to me isn't fully used to. And the thing that makes Baeko's voice so particularly good and the best in this group for me is in the middle of his voice when he opens things up and adds all the weight, brings up to a nice chest dominant mix, but brings in enough forward placement to make it sustainable. He has a beautiful, open, full, resonant, and again I hate the word, but very supported sound. When he's in the middle of his voice towards the F4 sort of place, his voice sounds the most open, most full, most resonant, and by far the most powerful with that weight that he brings up with the very good forward placement that he helps to implement to make the whole thing blended, seamless, and smooth. In the middle of his voice, it's the best part of anyone's voice in this entire group. It's so powerful, so unique, so captivating, and done in such a high energy and dynamic leaning way that his voice just has a captivating style that no one else really in this group can possess in that way. The only real negative of Baeko's voice is when he goes into his upper mix. Yes, he has a very good upper extension, and he has probably the best time singing the high notes and the high, big, strong notes in the group for me personally. But for example, when you're hearing the bet bet chorus and the or whatever the words are, it's noticeably quite in the throat and quite tight. While he can do it and it shows that he's got a good mixed voice, he understands how to kind of blend together the head voice sound but also the full weight of chest voice. As it goes up towards this kind of A4, B4 area, while he has it, it sounds tough on him. It sounds like he's probably struggling a little bit because he is bringing up quite a closed throat sound, a bit of a narrow sound in this upper extension. But But that's kind of interesting because he does have it, and occasionally I have heard him kind of open it up a little bit more, take it out of the throat, and sing in this way a little bit more convincingly and a little bit more sustainably. So to me, he technically kind of middle of his voice and down is the best in the group by far, has a full open, beautiful resonant belt, and as he goes up, he has an amazing upper extension that is really captivating and unique, but is a little bit narrow and a little bit noticeably tight, and sounds like sustainably it would be kind of hard on him in the long run, but he does that the most and can clearly do it and has done for an 8-year career, so he's clearly very skilled at doing that particular technique. Just I wouldn't personally want to sing in that key that way very often, but it works for him. But below that, his voice still sounds incredible, amazing. It's so powerful, so resonant, so dynamic, and I absolutely loved his voice. It was so good, but a little bit tight here and there. Okay guys, thank you so much for watching the new EST video. They were really fun to get to know. Their voices are all really good, and they're a very solid vocal group all the way through, and they're part of Pledis with My Boy 17, so it's fun to know the whole family. Okay, next time it'll be a big 4 group, and you guys have wanted this one for a while. I've kind of been putting it off a little bit, but you know what, let's do it. iKON, they're going to be next. Hope you look forward to that, guys, and goodbye.